I'm Luca Giliberti, contributing writer for Gold Derby, and I'm joined today by Carl Franklin, who was Emmy nominated this year for directing the first episode of Netflix's Dahmer, Monster the Jeffrey Dahmer story. First of all, Carl, congratulations. This is your second nomination in your career. So, how did you find out about the nomination, and what does it mean to you to be recognized for this specific effort?
Um, I was in New York as I was doing another pilot on
Mhm.
a mini series, and they knew about it. Someone told me, "Hey man, you're nominated," and I'm congratulations. And I noticed these texts that were coming in, and then people said, you were nominated for an Emmy, and I said, really? So hadn't expected to. So I thought that's cool, man. That's nice.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
you're nominated alongside your co-director, the legendary Paris Barkley. So that must be nice as well, right?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
and the episode you're nominated for is Bad Meat, which, like I said, is the first episode of the show, and we have so much to talk about. And it's such a tricky episode because, like I said, it's the first episode of the show, but it really depicts the climax of this story the show is telling. So I'd be
Right.
curious to hear from you how you prepared for the episode so that you could handle these two realities, so that you could ensure that the episode doubles as both an introduction to the story and as the climax thereof.
Well, it's interesting because the business of the first episode is I kind of viewed it as like the first act of a movie.
Mm,
Wherein, you want to introduce the characters, and then at some point, the first major plot point that propels you forward.
mhm.
Now, the only thing about that is because we were starting the story at the end
Yeah.
when he is when he's so there were a few things that actually were a little bit tricky. There was that we're starting the story at the end of the of his activities, and the other was, we did not want to glamorize Jeffrey Dahmer, or apologize,
Absolutely.
I should say, for him.
Hmm.
And so, it was important at the time that we were introducing our lead character that we also uh, don't make him sympathetic, and that we somehow don't necessarily get so involved in him as a human being.
Hmm.
So what we did was, because really, I kept it cryptic. We didn't even see his face.
Yeah.
uh, he was in the hallway, and
Okay.
that was purposeful. We wanted to make sure that, and the only time you really read his face is when he came up close to Glenda Cleveland next door, and you saw him as a threat.
Hmm.
And then the next time when you see him, from then on in, he's a predator. Um, and so we only discovered the apartment, really get a look at the apartment when the victim comes to the apartment, and we see it from his point of view. So it was important that we not, at the same time that we're introducing this protagonist and our lead character, that we not adopt his point of view.
Hmm.
Because part of what Ryan had discussed with me was, we wanted really to, the value of it is the effect that it had on the victims,
Yeah.
and on the lax, the neglect in the system to stop him when they had the opportunity to, and for various social reasons, and racial reasons also.
Yeah.
Why
Yeah.
they were slow to act. One of the things that's always been weird to me is that, like, in some of the documentaries that I saw a few documentaries on a couple of
Hmm.
them. They didn't, the police came to that place, and they smell that smell throughout the apartment complex, throughout the
Hmm.
apartment building. And it's like, that's an unmistakable smell.
Yeah.
And certainly a police officer would know that. So that still remains a mystery to me. Why they did not, pursue that, what their noses were telling them,
Yeah.
you know, that's still weird to me. But at
Yeah.
any rate, yeah.
Yeah. The policing competence, the racism, the homophobia that played into all of this is truly
Yeah.
the most horrifying and the most shocking part of the story. And I like what you mentioned here because that brings up the point of perspective and framing. And what's really interesting about the episode is that it, like the entire show at the end, is bookended by Glenda Cleveland,
Right.
which makes her, in a way, not just the protagonist, but also a surrogate for viewers So why was it important for everyone that she opened the episode, open and end the episode? And how did you sort of manage to put viewers in her shoes? Because it's so effective that we start in her apartment and we hear first what's going on next door. So talk a little bit about opening the episode that way.
Well, we opened it, with the sound of that saw,
Mm,
and really, and not even, first of all, we kind of, saw the TV, and we knew that, there was this racially charged, thing that was happening on the news, which was
yeah.
interesting. And then we kind of pulled the camera around to see her, see who was watching it. So we introduced her, big in frame, so that immediately she's the first image that you first human being that you see, and
Mm,
you see her up close, and then you see her concern, and then you see where she's looking, and then we went up to the vent, and then the vent was the connective tissue between the two, that's no pun intended, I mean, where you actually could, so we introduced the effects of the killer before we introduced the actual killer, how
yeah.
she was hearing it, how it was affecting people around her, and specifically in this case, her, how that was what she was suspecting next door, and already at this point kind of knew that there was something really, really amiss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you already talked about how we don't actually see Jeffrey's face until many moments later, and we see it from Glenda's point of view again. And what I think is
Right.
interesting is that after the camera slowly pans up to the vent, and then we go to his apartment. Um, like again, we don't see his face, but there's such an emphasis. I don't know if that was intentional on his hips specifically, and I found that to be very interesting. Was there any intention behind that? Because I think it happens multiple times in the episode. So I'd be curious to hear from you if there was
Well,
any.
we were, I don't know that we were looking for a sexual angle from
Yeah.
that. There was that as an added kind of bonus, but
Mm,
but basically what we were focusing on was just the washing of the blood
okay.
off of his hands, et cetera. And, and coupled with that, of course, is because that's where the predatory thing, in some ways, the
Exactly.
engine is running from sexual desire.
Hmm.
So yes, I mean, there was a consciousness about that, but it wasn't as though, we were trying to oversell that.
Yeah. Let's just stay on Evan Peters and Niecy Nash Betts for a second, because I have no idea at what point in the process this episode was shot. But like I said, it's like the climax of the show. So Evan and Niecy have to convey so much that we haven't even seen on the show yet. So what were some of the conversations you had with them so that they could get in the right headspace for this episode and also felt comfortable going to these very dark places, assuming that this may have been the first time they were walking around in these characters' shoes?
Well, Evan and I had rehearsals beforehand. Niecy wasn't
Ah,
available because she was working a show. She had
mm,
another show at this time that she was working on. But Evan and I actually had rehearsals. And when I do rehearsals, it's not as though they're up on their feet walking around and,
yeah.
mimicking the scene. We sit down and it's a discovery session, really, about
Mm,
what the scenes mean, what is the character's intent? Where did the character come from before this scene? Where is he going after this scene? Where are we catching that character in the continuum of his life, etc. And so Evan was a guy who had done a lot of research and who is very method, who really, really got into, the character to the point that it actually emotionally was taxing,
mhm.
was really, was he had some moments where it really was getting to him, because he's just a really gentle, really cool guy, and he was not playing that particular kind of guy. And
Yeah,
so, that was and in order for him to really seep inside of it, it was very important for him to kind of relate to this guy and to find, the Jeffrey
absolutely.
Dahmer himself. I contend, the way I always look at it is that, we all have, rather than superimposing a character on top of an actor, to me, I believe that under the right or the collection of wrong circumstances, any one of us can be any one of those people.
Mm,
We
mhm.
could there's an element someplace. Jeffrey's a little hard to figure out where you would find that guy inside of
Yeah.
yourself. you know, because really, and really that was part of the reason why we dealt with him in the impersonal way that I did, at least in the beginning,
Yeah.
is because, you know, the serial killers are kind of asocial monsters.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't
Absolutely.
operate with the same kind of equipment that the rest of us, psychological equipment that the rest of us operate with. And in fact, you know, it's, you can't really cure those guys, man. I mean, it's like a curse. You know, it's really, they are victims themselves in some respects, because, you know, they're victims to their own, you know, urges and desires, which are not human, basically. You know, that's not the toolkit that we, for the most part, that any of us are given at birth. You know, and with all of the social things that could come together to create that kind of a personality, you still wonder and say, well, you know, but other people go through the same thing and they don't do that.
Exactly.
So
that
it's
is,
like, yeah,
that's exactly what I was thinking about, because the show does explore, you know, his life. It does explore, you know, how has he gotten to this point? But that's literally the thought I had the entire time, was like, or anytime you have a true crime show about a serial killer, or any documentary about a serial killer, it's like they go through a lot, but other people go through the same thing, or may have gone through the same things, and don't end up in this place where they start taking other people's lives. So I thought that was such an interesting thought to kind of deal with while you're watching the show.
Yeah. And so, you know, it was important that Monster, you know, that as was an apropos, you know, word, not, title, but also a way to describe this character.
Absolutely.
Because that's, I mean, we still, who knows, you know, who really knows, you know, what drives these guys.
Definitely.
You know?
And I think what you mentioned earlier is very important, is that because once Tracy Edwards comes into the picture in the episode, we see everything from his point of view, and we see this horrific experience from his point of view. And what kind of results from that is this incredible tension. So I'd be curious to hear from you how you created that intensity or that tension without kind of exploiting the experience of this person, of this real person, because I feel like that must have been a very fine line to walk.
Yeah, I tell you, it was interesting because the script was so spare. It was about 37 pages, and I think it ended up, I think they added a scene, I don't remember which scene it was now, that brought it up to about 40 pages. But that's a very slim script for an hour, you know, show, and it was a little under an hour.
Yeah.
And what that allowed me to do was to kind of treat it it wasn't actually in real time, but it simulated real time. You know, so you could stretch out the silences, and the danger lives in the silences. Absolutely. What is going to happen? Because that's what the victim is wondering, because that's one of the things that the serial killers like to play with, is fear. They like the dominance. They want to, you know, and really that's where the real violence is. I mean, yeah, of course the real violence is in the physical, you know, destruction of another person or an animal or whatever. But the thing that amplifies it is the element of fear. The thing of your mind, you know, dying 1,000 deaths before the actual murder takes place. And so that was important, I felt, to dislodge the POV from the lead character and firmly root it in our victim. And also at that time, you know, to give the to let the audience, because you're seeing it from, like, for instance, when he's got the knife, oftentimes you're only seeing the knife and Sean and Tracy, you know, in the shot. Or, you know, you're on Tracy's, but everything was from his point of view. And so that it could get the audience in his perspective, so that they were seeing it, so that you're living through what this guy would have lived through. And especially in American society, I think that's important, because, you know, there's all of these mass shootings, and I do believe that there's just psychological disconnect people from the actual reality of what they're doing. You know, some of it I think is amped up by the whole kind of game culture. You
100%.
know, I think it's that, but I also feel that, like, there's sometimes, you know, serial killers and murderers and hit people in film and television are inadvertently, and I think it's a left-handed thing, are inadvertently empowered. And it becomes attractive to some people, you know, because they see the power of that, as opposed to the sickness, as opposed to the kind of ghoulish nature of someone who is not comfortable, who has not attained, you know, even control of themselves, let alone of someone else, but who are operating with, you know, kind of dark forces that don't have anything to do with humanity.
Absolutely.
You know, but at any rate, that was,
Yeah.
you know, foremost.
Yeah, I
You know,
mean, people have become very desensitized. I feel like desensitized to violence, desensitized to horrific things like this. I feel like that's another thing I was thinking about it. Not to go into detail here, but when the glasses, the Jeffrey Dahmer glasses, when those started going on sale or whatever, or people started buying them after the show, it's like people have become so desensitized to some of these stories, to violence, that that's sort of the result of it, and it's kind of horrific to witness.
it was interesting, you know. I before we started shooting, I was meeting the storyboard artist, you know, to, you know, kind of show him what I want, you know, for the shots, so that he could, you know, kind of draw what I was describing, and we could have that as a reference. And I met him at the Grove in LA, and I had this big lookbook which had floor plans, etc. And it had a big letters monster, and then small letters Jeffrey Dahmer, story Jeffrey Dahmer, had it under my arm, which I don't even know how this guy saw this. And the guy rushes up to me, is that about Jeffrey Dahmer? And I was like, oh, you know, this is like, this guy's got people that interested in his, you know. It was because, you know, I remember when it all was happening.
Yeah.
I didn't know any details. I just knew that, you know, he was supposedly killing these people and eating them, you know, and I didn't know, you know, that they were primarily gay men, and I did not know that they were, you know, minorities. I mean, I didn't know the details of the situation. It just, the headlines of you know, the kind of, you know, the lurid, were, you know, quality of the whole thing was all I was familiar with.
Yeah. And I
But in
think a
any,
lot of people, I mean, a lot of people are to this day. I mean, I think for a lot of people, this was their introduction to this story. I mean, obviously depends on age as well. Someone who's a bit younger like me, I had heard of it before and I know sort of the basic details, but this was the first time where I knew again about the police incompetence, about the racism, about the homophobia, everything that went into the story. And
uh,
and and then obviously we have so many episodes on the show that are also told from the perspective of the victims. So that's why telling the story was, or telling it in the way it's told on this show is so important. And the way I think it, the reason I think it struck such a chord with people.
yeah, I'm hoping that that's the reason.
Yeah, it's true. You never know.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, I agree with you, though. I do believe that that is the case, and I'm hoping
mhm,
that I'm right, you know.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And before we wrap things up, I do want to ask one question about one of my favorite scenes in the episode and one of my favorite scenes on the show, which is when Lionel is called into the police station, um, and has to, hear everything that his son has done. And obviously, he does. It takes him such a long time throughout the show to take responsibility for his involvement in his son's devolution into a murderer. But the reason this scene is so fascinating when he's called into the police station is that the camera just kind of sits there and observes him and catches every little emotion that flashes across Richard Jenkins' face. And obviously, Richard is a pro, but talk a little bit about working with him on that scene and what you kind of wanted to get out of him in that scene.
Well, you know, the character was a very reserved man who
Mm,
had problems, you know, showing affection. You know, he in some ways, you know, later episodes we see that he was struggling to figure out how to connect with his son because of his absence, because of work, and then also because of the relationship that he was
yeah,
in. The wife and he, you know, that relationship was obviously not, you know, you know, not that strong.
yeah,
And he was not engaged, you know. I didn't get the sense he was engaged even with the other brother, you know, that he was not engaged with either of them,
yeah,
and was trying to find a way to get, you know, he was someone who was not cold, you know, and comfortable in being cold. He really just did not know how
hmm,
to express his emotions. And that was something that, you know, we talked about, you know, Richard, of course, is an incredible actor. And it was just really about the levels of how much emotion he's going to show in the scene, how much of the unbelievable, surprise and hurt, etc., he could show, he could allow to peep out in intermittently throughout the interview. One, because of the kind of character that he was, but also he's also trying to protect his son.
Absolutely.
Because still, he didn't want to, to say things. He found himself saying things that were incriminating for the son, but he also wanted, he didn't do that on purpose. He still was trying to live up to his idea of what he thought a father should be and what he never had been. So there was, there were those elements that were at play, and he's such a good actor, man. I mean, you can fine tune with him and talk, on a subtle level that, in some instances you can't with some of the players. I mean, that was the same thing with Evan. Evan is just, one of the best that I've worked with. He's incredible.
Yeah. All the entire cast, Niecy Nash Betts as well. It's just everyone on the show is phenomenal. And just that scene, it's just like, it's so devastating to watch because you know exactly what he's going through, what Lionel's going through in his head. You may not agree with him or his actions or anything about the situation, but at the end of the day what he's doing in that scene, and that what he's dealing with emotionally, and that makes it so devastating to watch in a way. So it was very effective.
Yeah, we wanted to, the whole notion of being awakened in the middle of the night, driving, a couple hours to get to someplace, and then the pre-dawn, where it's right before the sunrise, when you're arriving at the building, all of that uncomfortable, there are things you can explain literally, but then there are also certain, what I was working toward was the visceral kind of, to try to get below, because the script was so spare, to to try to get inside of the feelings, so that it wasn't just, it was one of the things I really liked, because it wasn't glib with a lot of dialogue. It wasn't, where we had a chance to shoot the subtext and to go inside of the people and to really, kind of, put the audience in a sensory world that they had to share with the people who were, part of that radius of Jeffrey Dahmer.
Yeah. And I think that's a perfect note to end on. I could talk about this episode for so long. It's just such an effective introduction to the show, and such an important one. So thank you for walking me through the episode and your work on it. And again, congratulations on your Emmy nomination.
Oh, thank you, Luca. Pleasure, man.